Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today I am chatting to Sean Demobrosky from Edible Acres, a small permaculture nursery in central New York. And I got onto him because a friend recommended one of his videos working with Canna. And if you know anything about Canna, it's normally thought of as a tropical or subtropical crop. But to see this crop spreading into colder parts of the world is something that I'm really fascinated to explore more, and the other work that Sean is doing on his nursery and how that relates to the wider community and all the usual stuff that we talk about. So, Sean, tell us a bit more about your path in life that led to you running this really interesting and diverse permaculture nursery.
Sure, and thanks for having me on this. I'm excited to chat with you this evening. Yeah, I grew up with gardening as a major thing that my mom was involved. I grew up in northern New Jersey in like a pretty dense suburban context, definitely not farmland or farming community. And she always had gardens when I was little, unlikely gardens in the context where we were. Like most people had just mowed lawns. And I remember as a little kid, she was doing what I would now call like polycultures and guilds, but at the time was just like raspberries and mint seem like they grow well together, so I'm just letting them grow together. And sunflowers would grow for a while, and she'd push bean seeds in to like let them climb up the sunflowers because like we ran out of garden space or whatever. Um, and so I think I just had that experience as a little kid, and it baked in. And then guerrilla gardening was really exciting to me in my early 20s, and then that segued into getting a small piece of really abused land, like very, very beat up piece of property, and starting to plant trees to help repair it. And then learning about permaculture and food forest ideas probably a little less than 20 years ago, and then starting to really practice those concepts in a more thorough, like thoughtful way, and trying to apply like a design lens and an observation lens to the whole process and figure it out from there.
And what inspired you to start like sharing the material that you were generating to actually go the extra step of setting up a nursery? Because it's not a trivial thing to do. There's a lot of headaches and logistics that come along with that.
Yeah, I mean, it started out really tiny. It wasn't like, okay, now we're gonna, I'm gonna design this big, we're gonna be this nursery and we'll do 1,000 orders a year and this will be how much we make and blah blah. It truly came from planting so much different stuff way too close and then not being able to get through to other things or like losing garden beds to certain plants. And then, I jokingly say like there was a day where somebody asked me if I ever sell raspberry plants, and it was like around the time in the spring where I was trying to dig out all these raspberry plants that took up a walkway. And so I said yes. And then I was like, okay, I'll sell some strawberries because they left the garden bed and I got to dig them up anyway. And I would sell them on a local Craigslist, which it's like a local people's free forum for selling things, and I would wrap up 50 bare root strawberries in wet newspaper and sell them for $1 a piece. And then that was like, 18 years ago, 15 years ago. And so then it just slowly evolved into like now we have a website and we ship stuff to all over the US and have like 100 or 200 different types of plants that we offer. But it's still that same spirit of like, they're all plants that self-replicate readily. Some things take a little bit of effort, but for the most part, they're plants that are super amenable to self-expansion, and we ally with them and then manage their overabundance generally by offering that up for sale or for trade or gifting or whatever it's going to be. And it's evolved into it it's our entire livelihood. And like we don't do other jobs to subsidize it. It's all like the nursery makes it possible for us to have our family and be okay financially.
Does it feel like that journey is kind of repeating the story of agriculture itself? That it starts as this kind of, I don't know, do you ever wonder about how much people accidentally kind of backed into the agricultural lifestyle, just step by step? Each step seemed to make sense at the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I mean, I would hope to think, I'd like to think that we're not evolving or devolving into something that's like a very different vision than what we would want to be doing. Like, oh man, all of our ethics had to be shed because we're shipping, and so we got to do it with this brand new this thing. And like there's a little bit of that here or there, but it feels like it's evolving in line with like who we are and what we want to be doing.
Mm.
And so I don't know, for certain folks, I'm sure like the evolution with agriculture within their lives or multiple generations was in alignment, but then there's like exterior pressures that really make it fade from what they wanted to do, and then dot dot dot, and you've got like thousands of acres of monocrop, and that wasn't what you thought you were doing. And I don't feel like that's happened to us. So we're still pretty small, and I don't think we have any aspirations to like get tons of land and double or triple or get big machines and a warehouse. And like we're just going to keep doing it at the scale we are, I think.
Do you think there's a strategic advantage in farming degraded, complex, challenging land that you don't have an option of like just putting in 1,000 acres of corn and buying a monster tractor because the landscape is too difficult?
I think, yeah, I've never been drawn to the idea or the promise of some like perfect agricultural context to farm within. I started where I grew up, it was a small suburban lot and like eighth of an acre, quarter acre, and it was really rough soil. It had like weird fill stuff from way back in the day, and you'd pick up, dig in and get big pieces of concrete. But it was like okay, and it worked fine enough. And then guerrilla farming in Trenton, New Jersey was like I would literally dig through broken glass and like needles and stuff in the park to plant. Um, and something about that felt exciting and like kind of radical and interesting. And then yeah, having working with land that's been like, quote unquote taken over by invasive, which I don't really use that. I don't believe or ascribe to that kind of language, but like just what people would imagine of like, oh, here's landscapes that there's burnt old trash in places, but then also it's just super chaotic with shrubs and vines all through that aren't necessarily ideal. It feels like the stakes aren't as high to make sure you do it perfectly because it's not like absolutely creamy 4 feet of topsoil and prime ag land, and I better do the right thing. Like if it's kind of beat up and trying to heal itself, you can dive in and try to facilitate. And that ecological part of succession feels like it's really good at handling entropy anyway without it being like a dynamic force that collapses things. So then
Mm.
it takes the pressure off. Like you can do better probably, and if you don't, it'll just fill right back in with what it was really quickly if you give up on it.
Yeah, yep, yep. Now we have to talk about Canna first because this is like the
Sure,
the
yeah.
crop that I love the most. Just start out telling me like your experiences, like how did you first find it, and how is it adapted to such a different climate?
Well, I should be very clear. And the video that I made about Canna, I was clear within it, like, hey, I'm very, very much novice within this. And in fact, it was an experiment of like telling people that I've been growing Canna, this is why I'm excited to grow it. And that in our climate, I don't feel like I have any competency in knowing how to properly store the tubers for the winter. And so soliciting in the comments for like actual intelligence, like instead of the AI thing of like have it generate a thing, like have other human beings generate. And so it was neat to learn from others about all the different ways that people store canna. Um, but this was the first year I grew it in any real way, and it wasn't even that large scale. It was there's an Amish run nursery up that I have a relationship with the nursery manager there. And so I go and trade for produce and things like that for nursery stock that we have. I'm helping them develop into a perennial and permaculture nursery for the Amish community. And they had these dried up, gnarly looking canna tubers with like a handwritten sign on a piece of cardboard, and it was $2 a chunk. And so I just spent $10 this spring, and then it became this like crazy fascination during the growing season with just how intensely vigorous they were, and then that uh, they farmed moisture out of the air and stored it in the soil around them better than any plant I've seen before. And then thinking about like biomass uses and companion planting and scaffold planting and seeing the hummingbirds that were in the area start to really come to them. It locked it in as like, oh, this is probably the most promising new plant I'm working with this year, and like one of the more exciting ones over the last few years. And it still feels questionable how we'll properly store tubers for the winter, but I have a nice root cellar and nice condition, so hopefully it'll be okay.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, trying to prime myself to ramp up pretty. I collected seed from a whole bunch of cannas all through like ornamental area. I just basically like raided the tops of them after the first frost and have all these different seeds to try to sprout in the spring. Um, but it's a very, very new crop, but one that I'm putting a lot in because it feels very promising to me.
And that's something that I've only recently got a handle on is like how ridiculous those temperate summers are that you have so many hours of sunlight. The temperatures are like as hot as it gets here in Australia. You've just got the really
Hmm.
cold winters to deal with at the other extreme.
Hmm.
A plant that is capable of using all of that growing season can be so ridiculously productive. And I saw the size of the plants in your video that were grown from pretty small starting tubers, and it's just astonishing the amount of biomass that they can put together and useful biomass too in multiple directions. The first thing I want to ask though is, did those cultivated varieties set any seed for you, or was it only the ornamentals that you had seed on?
The I think what I got from the Amish was Canna indica. I
Hmm.
think, and maybe you could give me some feedback on this. It was a pretty much a green leaf and red flower, and they're all clones, and they put on red flowers that then were pollinated by hummingbirds and other flying insects. And it wasn't an immense seed load. It wasn't like every single pod was full, but I got
Mm.
like 60 or 80 seeds from maybe four plants, which felt like enough to then. Yeah, I looked it up online. Like, can you save seed from these and what to look for? And like, yeah, they have to be rock hard and black. And then somebody was lamenting in a video, like, yeah, you can save true seed from canna, but the problem is when you grow it from true seed, then it makes like every different color of flower imaginable instead of the one you want. I'm like, no, no, no. That you sold me on like every color imaginable. That's what I would want to just
Yeah.
see what's next, Like if they're that open, I like saving seed from plants that really just like really bust open when you try growing the next generation.
Yeah, yeah. So the plants I saw in your video don't line up with what, at least in Australia, is called Canna indica. Canna
Okay.
indica here has basically no tuber, and it sets seed extremely prolifically. It can become quite a
Hmm.
persistent weed. Um,
Okay.
so I think there's multiple strains and clones that are labeled Canna edulus, but it's really
Hmm.
just it's a cultigen kind of a bucket that a whole lot of different genetics is put into. And yeah,
Hmm.
you've probably got one of the strains that's relatively fertile that it managed to set some seed, but they're usually not self-compatible, so it's probably picked up pollen from some of the other cannas in the local area, particularly if you had hummingbirds that were active. So yeah,
Interesting.
definitely
Whoa.
grow that out and see what you get.
Hmm.
My guess, well, some of the edible cannas have reasonable tubers on them. So depending on what you're working with there, the first generation might have something useful, but at the worst case, you can always just backcross to those original edible forms that have reasonably sized tubers. Um,
I
and
mean,
yeah,
the tubers were giant. Like
mm,
there were some that were, I mean, it was like a 30 to 1 increase on some of them, or 20 to
mhm.
1 increase from what was originally planned. It was one of the biggest increases I've seen in root crop in a season. And I grow a lot, I grow lots of different varieties of potatoes, and we do sweet potatoes, and we've messed with ginger and turmeric, and we have Jerusalem artichokes and like all these tubers that are pretty darn productive, and the kind of in that rich soil that got redirected water from a rain catchment system, like the overflow of a rain catchment flows through there. They, I was stunned with how much like they were swelling and pushing out of the soil with the
Mm.
amount of yield. So if it is edulous and that would be technically an edible tuber, that would be very exciting because
Yeah.
it's a lot. It's a lot of food.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, did you get a chance to explore using the tubers yet? Because they're a little bit different to potatoes.
No, we haven't tried eating them. It's one of those things where it's like I maybe we will a little bit this winter, but I basically I dug them out. I didn't wash them. I tried to knock most of the soil off. I let them kind of set and dry a little in the garage,
Mm.
sheltered from sun and rain for a bit, and then broke them apart and I'm storing them in like neutral sawdust, like slightly moist but not very, down in like 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, and I guess I'm interested to ramp them up enough that we haven't explored eating any, but I'd like to see like if January, February rolls around, they still feel really, really firm, then maybe we
Mm.
take some of the largest ones and see if it's actually a food. And I'd love to hear from you because you eat them quite a bit, right? Like that's a
Yeah,
pretty
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's multiple ways of using them, but one thing I noticed, I think I commented on the video, you were breaking all of the tubers apart, and
hmm
the way storage happens in your cold climate is probably going to be really different from mine, but I have past experience of like digging up lots of tubers like that and they brown and rot really readily if they get exposed to air. So you might find like pulling out whole clumps without all of that breaking up might give you a better result.
Hmm.
I don't know, you're going to have to like try and find out. Um,
Yeah.
and well, the other thing I thought about too is one really huge advantage with Canna is that you can crush up the tubers and extract the starch. So you don't necessarily have to store the entire bulk of the tubers. You can shrink that down to like 5 to 10% of the mass in a
Hmm.
form that stores basically indefinitely. Like it stores even better than grains. So
Hmm.
that's where I see its huge potential as a crop for a potentially volatile future if the climate is shifting and changing and doing unpredictable things. If you can build
hmm
up a store of canna starch, it will last you as long as you need it. It'll be
Hmm.
there decades afterwards if you can keep it dry.
Do you have ways of seeing how to do that, or like leads for, like processes? Is it straightforward that average people without much equipment can do it?
So you can do it at a very low tech level. So even just like vegetable graters will get a decent yield of starch. Of course, if you mechanize that or use slightly more sophisticated machinery equipment, you could scale it up without, breaking your fingers.
hmm
But yeah, it's quite different to cassava in the tropics is used to produce starch as well. But because it has really tiny starch grains, you need quite sophisticated ways of filtering and separating the starch. Whereas with canna, it just sinks straight to the bottom of the water, and you can
Hmm.
you can manually remove the pulp from the top. And it dries down really readily too for the same reasons that the starch grains are
Neat.
just ridiculously large.
Yeah, that's something to play with because my wife does an immense amount of cooking and is really creative with that and is interested in like we have this perennial purple Peruvian potato. So many peas. And it's a super, super dark anthocyanin rich potato. And it took her a little while to get a feel for like how to cook it in a way that
Yeah,
wasn't too sour and wasn't too this. And now it's like it's the main potato we eat. And
yeah.
and we've Kennebec and nice, fluffy sweet ones, but we tend to go for the purple one and the really rich nourishing older foods tend to draw us in more, but there's that hurdle of like,
Yeah.
the barrier to entry kind of thing to work with them.
And I know from bitter experience that like when you're about to cook a big batch of dinner for the week, do you put some new ingredient into the mix that could ruin the batch? Or do you just
Right?
go back to
Yeah.
do you go back to the things that you know are going to work and you don't take
Yeah.
that risk?
Yeah.
I think I put a post up a while ago about cooking whole canna tubers. So again, that browning can be an issue, and I found the best way with like young new tubers is to just chop them, put them in a pot of water and boil them whole. And only after they've cooked for half an hour, then you peel the skin off them. And they have long fibers running through them that are relatively soft. And if you cut across those fibers and then cube it, you end up with something that's like potato. And we haven't found the fibers bother us at all. I thought we'd be
Hmm.
picking them out of our teeth, but we didn't even feel them while we were chewing.
Oh, neat. Okay. Yeah,
Mm,
there's a lot for us to explore there. Yeah, the breaking apart thing, uh, in order to pack them away in the containers that I have, they needed to be smaller. But I
mm.
guess that's something to see. Like I'll have to see what comes of it, and hopefully they don't get. I think if the media around them is too moist, that seems
Yep.
like it would be more probably like you want it to be. I was going to close the containers to preserve moisture, but for now I'm leaving them open so that air can move around. And even though they're in moist sawdust, like I'd like the sawdust to kind of dry down and not hold too much moisture there. That does that seem reasonable to
Yeah,
you?
yeah. I would use dahlia tubers as a model. They're probably
Hmm.
close in their preferences to dahlia tubers.
Okay.
Mm,
Dahlias have been hard for me. That's one I'm trying to ramp. Like I lost a bunch in storage, but I think they got too cold. They got down in like the low 30s for
mm,
us, like pretty close to freezing. And it feels like they don't really want to experience anything within like 5 or 10 degrees of freezing around
mm.
the roots.
Have
Um,
you ever played around with what do they call them? Cloches? Like you dig a pit that's below the freeze line and then put all your tubers in it and cover it with vegetation for insulation?
we've got a lot of voles here, and I
Ah,
think any tuber that's edible raw for human beings, I generally don't put it, I don't think to put them in like a fall excavated
yeah,
storage context because there it's loose and it's insulated, it's warm, and all this food's there. Like Jerusalem artichokes are one that we grow them out. We just let them stay in the field, and we'll invariably lose a fair bit to voles, but there's
yeah,
lots that remain.
yeah,
Um, but we have a root cellar in our basement that I built, a very, very simple one, and then other contexts within our basement that are pretty stable and like no direct sunlight and relatively even moisture and temperature. And so I kind of like I have turmeric roots that are stored in one part of the basement that are it's warmer, and sea kale roots, or it's a perennial brassica, like a
mm,
oceanic brassica, and like those roots will move out of the root cellar and into this other part where we store our winter boots and like near our garlic, and like slowly finding these little microclimates in the dingy basement
yep,
to hold these plants in different ways. And the can is completely unknown, but it feels like it shouldn't be in the root cellar where we're trying to hold uh, potatoes and like right above freezing kind of stuff, but like
yeah.
right near that and slightly out of that. So
Interesting.
hopefully it works. Yeah, if I start seeing weird stuff, maybe I can send you photos of what I'm seeing and get some like
Absolutely.
troubleshooting support.
Well, I'll be really interested to see what your pest pressure is on the tubers because here we have completely different things eating in tubers. We have a local marsupial called a bandicoot, and it
Hmm.
will eat high cyanide cassava for like its candy, but they take a few bites of the canna tubers and then they move on. And I
Hmm.
don't know what the defense mechanism is. It might just be that they brown so rapidly that they can't get protein out of the tuber and they get put off. At any rate, it's got
Hmm.
some kind of interesting defense mechanism. Um,
We we in the field context where we grow a lot of crops that do in almost every beet, almost every carrot, all the turnips will get vole damage at some point because it's a field, very open sun context, and we manage both weed pressure and moisture loss by doing like immensely deep mulching
mm,
regimes. And you just lose things to voles, but I'm happy with the trade-off because I want the soil to not experience drying and suffering.
mhm.
The cannas there that also got deep mulch, there was absolutely zero interest from voles.
Yeah,
And that was
yeah,
interesting to see. Like nothing above the deer moving through the landscape didn't touch a leaf. The rabbits didn't touch the stems or the leaves at all.
mm,
There were no insects that put any holes into any part of they were completely blemish free and left alone in each place that they were growing this year, which I didn't know if it was an anomaly, but there's something to that that's like,
yeah.
I don't know, they have like a magic force field or something going on.
And it's interesting because I have no trouble feeding the tops to goats. Like they love eating the tops. So they're
Hmm.
not it's not like they're just absolutely toxic. There's just something going on with them that I can't quite figure out.
Hmm.
So it's interesting to see you've had a similar experience.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, because we don't really, there are some areas that are fenced off for certain types of crops, but by and large, we grow things with the idea that let's hope we get most of it. Sometimes it'd be nice if we get all of it, but I'm generally content with like half of whatever we're trying to grow is for human beings, and the other half is for everybody else who might want it.
Mm,
Um, but with the canna is like one of the few crops this year that there's like truly zero other beings that took a bite, and I'm interested to expand them in the field context, have a lot of diversity, and even have like some blocks of them that are pretty contiguous and solid, and see if that changes the dynamics. Like now there's this patch and the voles can find it and really get into it.
mm.
That would be interesting to see. So that's part of my plans for next year is to ramp it up about like maybe 20 to 30 times what we did this year and just see what it is as a serious crop in our system.
Do you think it has any other potential uses for like biomass or barriers or soil remediation or like it's such a weird flexible plant.
It felt like the rate of growth and the soil swelling in particular would make it a compatible boundary plant, like a rhizome barrier for runner grass.
Mm,
That's a pretty big gauntlet to run with something that's that like intense and fast growing and shade offering. Um, Definitely interested to explore next season, having some of them be interacted with the machete and use like sometime in July or so when we start getting into drought moments, taking a few sacrificial plants and cutting them low
mm.
and using that material to like support transplants that are going in and see what the recovery and the rebound rate is for those cut plants. Um, yeah, like what would they do for decompacting tighter soils? That'd be interesting to see. Um, so yeah, they'll fall into that same regime with like a lot of the plants of like, okay, cool, you're really great at life, it seems. Let's try you in a lot of different ways and all these different ways of interacting and asking you to support other plants that are feeling a little more fragile in the system.
Yeah, yeah. They're probably my favorite plant to cut for biomass. Like
Hmm.
the sickle goes through them like butter, and you've got a relatively small number of like human-sized stems to carry around. They've got a lot of water in them, so if you're moving them long distances compared to
Hmm.
grasses, there's not as much actual carbon in them compared to like the amount of
Yep.
water. But if you're cutting them close to where you're using them, then it's not as much of a problem. And the
Hmm.
material breaks down pretty quickly, at least here in the subtropics, which is good for
I would
some
think so.
things and not good for other things. But there's other plants that have more persistent biomass if you're trying to
Right.
mulch long term.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of miscanthus grass here
Hmm.
that we work with, which I probably have as well, but that's super high carbon, high silica,
Mm.
and cutting those midsummer that persists quite a bit, especially cutting late winter when it's like completely dormant stalks and stay saving those for mulch later on in the season.
Mm.
You could put down really wet, high fertility mulches that are meant to like fast feed and then mulch that mulch with the drier mulch to protect it.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
tends to do a really nice job.
The other thing I'm really curious about in a temperate climate is the possibility that canna could be bred into a seed-grown annual crop that you actually start again each year, that you don't have to wrestle with storing all of those tubers over the winter. Can you see
Hmm.
any potential for that to be an advantage? Because the seeds store forever, like they're incredibly resilient seeds as well.
Hmm. Yeah, this is the first, I mean, like, super novice with this,
Mm,
absolutely. And I have seed from the plants we set in motion, random seeds from very tall canna in the downtown area near us that had dark red leaves and were
mhm,
like 8 feet or 9 feet tall. And then Michael Longfield from Interwoven Permaculture,
mm,
who I know you connect with, he sent me seeds from some of the more promising lines that he's working on that I think might have come from you. I'm not
mm,
sure.
mm.
Um, but so my intent is in the spring to get those going. And maybe from what I understand of it, the seeds you need to pour, like ideally pour like really nice warm water, like a nice warm stratificate.
Boiling water.
Okay, so
Yeah.
really intense.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And even lately with some of the lines I've been breeding, so when I was doing this originally, like you get the jug straight off the boil, you pour a few centimeters over the seeds, and when it's working, you'll hear this weird musical tinkling sound as the seed coats are being shocked. And
Hmm.
lately, the lines I've been breeding more extensively have stopped doing that, and I don't know why. It's just a random thing that's popped up, and I've had to go back to sanding the seed coat to get fast
Hmm.
germination. So I don't know if it's a trait that I have to get around, but the reason why they do this is they come from swamps that periodically catch fire. So they're the
Hmm.
perfect plant for Australia. Like they can be under a meter of water or on fire, and they're just like, oh, it's another day in paradise.
Right.
So,
Wow. Wow.
but yeah, be prepared for that. If you sow the seeds without breaking that dormancy, you get really sporadic germination.
And they need really warm soil to get moving after that, I would assume, right?
Uh, I I'll have them germinate in winter, no problem. But I mean, my winter is probably not particularly cold. So
I
yeah, I
mean,
know.
yeah.
Play around with it. You'll probably find a way through. But yeah, just be warned. That's a potential barrier. But the upside is that if you put a bunch of seeds in a bowl and like stick that at the back of a shed, you could probably come back 50 years later and still get germination, which I don't think there's any other staple crops that have that potential unless you're living in like, highland, cold environment that's really dry.
Yeah. I mean, we have water lotus seeds, and I know some of those can hold for like a couple thousand years, and
Hmm.
they take they take explicit scarification. You can't do hot water bath for them, and it's like pretty particular how you scarify for it to work. Um, but that was my intent was around so we have high tunnels to get things going,
Mm.
and within the high tunnels, I will often build um, relatively large active compost heating systems.
Hmm.
And we use those beds we put a tent over that. And then that's where we'll start our peppers and tomatoes. And I'll often like put crates of turmeric and ginger in there just to get things warmed up. And
Yeah.
my intent was like that'll be late March, early April for us, which is still like a month or more before the last frost. And I was going to do the hot water bath treatment on these canna seeds and then communally sow them in flats of like good, loose, rich soil.
Yeah,
And
they will love that. You'll get them off to a really rocking start.
okay. And then do you step them up into containers from there or do you move them out to their final
Uh,
location? But you're so much
as long
warmer.
as they're not going to get a freeze at the roots, then they'd probably even take a light frost and still come roaring back.
Okay.
One thing it could be worth looking at as well, because you're going to have really diverse genetics, and not all of it is going to be great. When you've got those small plants, if you can actually inspect the roots, I've found that the plants that end up producing the best tubers will have noticeably larger tubers, even when they're like a 10 centimeter tall seedling. So you can
Hmm.
actually start making selections, or at least testing if you can make selections early on. So like go through all the seedlings, pick out the best third of them that have promising looking bases and plant them in a separate bed and see if that actually is a trait that you can start selecting before you have to grow the entire plant out.
That's pretty neat. Yeah,
Mm.
my intent would be to grow everyone that is interested in trying to grow because that's how I
Mm.
like to normally do things. And then not really select not select in the spirit of like eradicating those that are underperforming because it feels unfair because like there's so many different reasons why you might not be super big and super beautiful. Like there's a lot of like sometimes you're just a little cramped or like you didn't get enough water and like you're amazing, but you don't get a chance. So like I try to give space for that.
Yeah.
But it's neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of like looking for those that have rambunctious roots to not kill every other plant, but put those in a different spot just to keep an
Mm.
eye on them makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Now, I could talk about Canna all day, and I'm really excited to stay in contact with you as that
mhm.
project develops for you. But I heard you also doing some work with American persimmon. So, what's your approach to dealing with the genetic diversity of that crop?
Yeah, well, I mean, the persimmon is like other plants where I think in one way you could describe the work I'm doing as some breeding and selecting work. And then I don't think I ascribe a super high level to it. It's just we work with these plants for a while and really enjoy them, want to amplify them as much as possible. And then periodically there'll be certain seedlings that show traits that feel really exciting. And so again, the same spirit of not then like, okay, only select seed from those and grow that out, but try to save those seeds and put them in their own line and then keep growing everybody else out just to see what that land race evolves into. Persimmons, it's a slow process. I'm 45. I probably get like maybe three total rounds of doing thoughtful selection before I'm dead. And so there's a couple trees that have shown really promising attributes. We're in a very cold climate, we get really, or it can be a cold climate, it's warming, but we can have pretty long winters, like multiple months where there's no direct sunlight. And It doesn't really get above freezing at all, even during the day. Um, and selecting for tree persimmons that have fruit that tend to ripen the latest
Hmm.
and then hold on the longest
Hmm.
is the most compelling to me because like there's so many other candies and snacks in the landscape during the growing season. Like I don't need a persimmon that comes on in September for us. I want one that begins around Thanksgiving, and the best seed I want to save is from ones where like I ate them and it was February. And like they just happen to hold on that long and they're like black and like tough, sugary, caramelized things. So there's a little bit of that going on, but I still tend to mix everything together and then set aside one or two trees worth of like there's one we named after our daughter that's like short and wide and makes the biggest American persimmon I've met. It's like extremely creamy and has really beautiful plump seeds that are bigger than the other American persimmon, so it feels as though it's its own unique genetic expression. So we'll plant those in their own beds and then grow them out for our own plantings. But it's like 9 years before you get fruit from the kids of that. So it takes a minute.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm really curious about the challenge of how do you select, particularly from tree crops? So if you plant a diverse orchard or forest or whatever you want to call it. And then, you see the first tree that produces really, really early, and you're like, okay, well, that's what I want. And you chop down all the other trees, and you risk missing out on all of the other hidden traits. And even beyond that, further on, some trees will have really good years and then they'll have a rest year. Is
Yep.
that necessarily the worst thing in the world if, on average, you end up with a more productive tree, even if it occasionally has a break? Like, how do you judge the quality of something as multifaceted as a tree?
Yeah, I'm not in it for, we gotta find the best of the best, and this is going to be the one that takes over the persimmon market, and every orchard's going to want our patented, persimmon line and grafted persimmon tree. Like that isn't compelling in any way at all to me.
Mm,
I do have a really deep affinity for persimmon in particular. Lots and lots of trees. We work with many, many different types of trees, but persimmon has been very potently annual bearing for the 16, 17 years or so now that I've been harvesting fruit from different parent trees. They pretty much never take a year off. Some years will be a little weaker and some like extremely strong to the point where like the branches start to rip themselves apart under the fruit load. But that's that's a very important attribute for any tree crop in my mind is that with all the turbulence of like we get way too warm way too early and like apricots and peaches start to flower and then we always will get a frost and that we get a strong apricot crop 1 out of every 5 years because of that,
mm,
whereas the persimmons they don't begin to flower until June and they avoid all that. So just that attribute alone makes them extremely compelling. And then, yeah, like I have no interest in, and then saying because this one or those three have the attributes we want, all else must die. Um, if there are some trees that like I definitely don't want what they have to offer in the seed line of the trees we're growing out. Like the fruit is very small, or the tree has a weird form, or it gets cankers on it, or something just seems off.
mm,
And so to me, in the spirit of doing service to the land that's around us, those trees, like the deer and the turkeys, don't complain if it's a smaller persimmon. And in fact, like the smaller they are, the more amenable they are to turkeys and other
mm,
wildlife.
mm,
And like pawpaws, like the smallest pawpaws, we don't collect for seed because those are the ones that the chipmunks and the red squirrels and the small creatures really adore. And so that just takes the pressure off. Like I don't have to ever worry about visiting those trees to get seed for us or get food for us. Those are exclusively for the wildlife.
mm.
Um, but we still mow under them to make it easy for them. And then we can focus our efforts on the ones that feel the best or for our purposes and not feel like there's like competition happening.
Well, again, this gets back to the idea of history repeating. Do you think the way that you're managing and selecting those persimmon trees is an echo of the way Indigenous people in North America have been selecting and moving and interacting with tree crops for a very long time.
I don't know. I'm woefully undereducated in a lot of ways. And like history is something that I keep thinking I'll someday find myself with like the time and the bandwidth and the interest to really sit down and understand what the traditional ways were that happened here. There is something that feels just very simply and intuitively like not correct as in to the exclusion of other pathways, but just innately correct in relating to trees that bear food that keep us alive is to feel reverence and appreciation and endeavor to do the best I can to get their kids as far as disseminated as far as possible. And like we have this weird reality right now where like people send us money over the computer and we can put things in boxes and send these plants all over the place. So then um I wonder if first peoples here had the ability to like put the seeds on the back of a bird and like have that bird send it somewhere and then like start there, they it feels like they probably would have because it's neat to see the plants. Like I get feedback from folks in like very far away places like having great success with these plants in like way more relaxed climates or like I had no idea ginger could perennialize here in Maine, like, because the one we work with feels way hardier than it was ever reported to be. And now there's more people that can like test that and explore that. Um, but I can't speak at all to like, oh yes, this is how the people would have done it in the past. It does feel like it feels like the trees are excited with the relationship. It feels that way to me, like they're
Yeah.
into what's going on, and I hope that that's true.
Well, just an aside, I've got a couple more persimmon questions, but have you had experiences that make you wonder if there's more to change in living things, particularly plants, than just shuffling genes? That you've even seen like asexually cloned material that you've gotten transform in some ways that seems to be persistent and but it's more in response to its environment, or maybe there's microbial relationships changing, or I don't know, like
Yeah,
is
I don't know. I think um so I'd like to believe that I observe a lot in the work that I do. But the reality is I think I've observed that there are just so many variables to what's going on. Like the same cutting of an elderberry in six different contexts will be pretty similar, but have some nuance and maybe even different timing. Like it almost feels like it could be six different plants from
mm,
six different parents. Um, and having that feeling of like it's so variable that there is not I don't know that there's a possibility of having some like really solid concrete takeaway that I can then predict and plan on that I just kind of like relax my eyes a bit about those parts. So, like I find myself being like blurrier or glossier around like monitoring the details of nuance between clones or nuance
mm.
and just like, yeah, everything's kind of crazy everywhere and it's pretty awesome. And so then if I focus more on like I'm always planting seeds and always putting trees in and we're constantly trying to just facilitate plants generating more of their own bodies and getting them disseminated, um, then that takes up most of my bandwidth and like really honing in on this thing or that thing is less. I don't know that I'd be good at it because I don't trust that there's anything I could actually take away as like any sense of truth about it. It's also murky and wild.
I definitely get the feeling you could spend your entire life in a fluoro lit laboratory to prove like one extra mechanism that life uses to change and adapt, but there would still probably be 100 others out there that nobody knows about. So
Yeah.
you're only helping people with that like explanation. Like the tools are much simpler than that. You can just have a relationship with the plants that you're growing. But getting back to persimmons,
Yeah.
have you had any experience with hybrid persimmons between Asian and American strains?
No, well, just a little bit of different folks suggesting how exciting they are. and that I'm open to it. That Michael Longfield seemed really strongly encouraging of taking on. We're planning on, we did a whole bunch of trading this fall. We plan on trading this winter again,
Hmm.
and so I'm open to receiving scion wood for varieties that he thinks are particularly good at cold hardiness for our area, which
Mm.
I think is a little, we're on the boundary. We're zone 5B, 6A, but we'll once in a while we'll experience a night that's like -18 Fahrenheit, -23 Fahrenheit, like so deep. It's only for a moment, but that's all it really, 6 hours of that, and plants that are not hardy to that are just shattered. So I haven't put a ton of effort into like Russ and Yenka and Nikita's Gift and these intersectional ones. I'm open to it, and but I also feel like the kaleidoscope of craziness of the American persimmon line is
Mm.
like, oh, cool. If that's all it ever is, it doesn't feel like, I feel so limited that we're working with all these seedling American persimmons.
Yeah, yeah. My personal theory is that that genus Diospyros has hundreds of species, and I think at least a dozen of them with really good quality eating fruit. Some of them in the tropics, like I've got native ones that grow around my area.
Mm,
They have the potential to hybridize in the way that apples did. Like modern apples, domestic apples have at least five different wild species that have been mixed into one packet,
hmm
because they were domesticated on the Silk Road, and people were like eating wild apples and walking up and down
mm,
and like
hmm
dropping seeds everywhere. And yeah, I think something like that could happen for the persimmon genus and create
Yeah.
something. I mean, it's already such an amazing fruit, but it has so much more potential. And if you do the hybrid persimmons produce seed? Like I'd recommend growing the seeds out and then filtering rather than grafting. But I don't know
Yeah.
how
I mean,
fertile they are.
I don't know. I think a lot of people do a ton of breeding work in like their orchards where it's just grafted cultivar female persimmons so that you do get completely seedless fruit.
Mm,
Like that's a very desirable trait for most people. And then I've had some persimmons that are like really big and then they have seeds, but they're not filled out because there wasn't pollen, like the pollen was incompatible.
mm.
And the mouth feel of that is so unpleasant of like a little flaccid, like empty little sack. I like a nice rock hard, firm, smooth seed that feels like, oh, like a living kid in that thing. I better like get that into some sawdust to make sure it doesn't freeze. Like
Yeah.
that's more compelling as a consumer of the fruit for me anyway. Um, but we'll see. He's gonna send along Scionwood, and I'm definitely gonna try my best to graft them. We have more male persimmon in the landscape than the ratios would be than our ideal. Like I want
Mm,
good pollination, but I don't want it to be like more than 30 or 40%,
mm.
and it's way higher. So my plan would be to convert a fair bit of the males over to like a multi-graft of experimental intersectional stuff and just see, but not to be like, this is my new thing and I'm gonna get a notebook and I'm gonna document and blah blah. It's just part of the like the confetti of experiments kind of
Yeah.
thing.
It's opening the door to fortune rather than trying to force your way through.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
just yeah, giving it an opportunity to express itself. And if they all die, then like okay, then those would be strangely formed male persimmon, and maybe someday we'll explore managing the pollard growth of them because it feels very as an ebony family plant, it's very, very strong. Like I climb persimmons and they're freakishly strong. The branches, like it feels a little dreamy how much they can hold on their branches. And like we can prune these in ways where we can generate rafters, like load-bearing wood elements for round pole future buildings for like when our daughter's in her 20s or 30s, she could build her own structure that has like jet black hardwood and can like
mm.
hold thousands of pounds on it. So that would be cool.
That is the height of luxury to be able to construct with that beautiful wood.
Yeah,
Amazing.
and also it's the height of just subsistence living too.
Yeah.
Like that's the interesting
Yeah.
part is like it feels and eating persimmon feels like the most opulent, ridiculous, luxurious thing. And it also feels like I shook this cool, strange plant and a bunch of like goobers fell on the ground and we eat them out of the dirt. And like it's both things at the same time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. What about Diosporus lotus, the little tiny one? Is it too cold where you are to grow?
I've never heard of anyone growing that. I've looked at them a little, and there's like chocolate lotus or chocolate
Mm,
persimmon, and but I don't think that happens here.
yeah, yeah.
We're cold.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I believe that's why the American persimmon was like there's a selection from further south that was spread way up into the cold regions by indigenous people because it could handle those environments. Like
Yeah.
it's very much a human plant for much of its range.
And our
Uh,
entire line that we grow from are from Elwyn Meter's research plantings up in New Hampshire, and which was quite a bit colder than where we are, which to me feels like a really great backbone attribute that like all the progeny from what we grow out should whatever improvements in fruit quality and form, they should also be hardier than anything our region has experienced, at least in the last few hundred years. If like the arc as the we're particularly vulnerable to the like breaking of the Arctic air mass, which periodically happens, like the jet stream fails and there's an inversion and it's warmer at the Arctic than it is where we live. Um, and those are like profoundly strong moments, and like they really change what survives. And so I want to make sure like we're committing a lot of stuff that's way hardier than where we are, just in case there's like 2 or 3 days. And if I did stuff that was like, oh, it's only getting warmer, then we could lose like 80% of all the work within one evening. That's a possibility.
yeah. Ironically, though, like I'm kind of jealous of those winter freezes. Like with Canna here, if I plant out like test beds of it, and then I'm like, okay, I've extracted the interesting varieties that I want to move on to the next generation, I have to like manually get in there and remove them myself because they
Hmm.
just never stop growing. Whereas you just have to, put the good varieties, tuck them away from the winter freeze, and then you come back
Hmm.
out and you've got like a blank slate to repeat the cycle. I
Yeah.
think. Mm,
Yeah, well, I'm interested in having some, maybe next year there's enough growing where the canna can be a cover crop to decompact soil and add
hmm
an immense amount of biomass and organic matter and let them pass away. Yeah, like we do Sudan grass to that end. Like Sudan grass would just grow indefinitely by you, but for
mm,
us, it terminates in like the very first frost. It's like the whole top just starts liquefying, and then by the spring, there's an immense root mass down there, but it's all just being digested. And
yeah.
so you can just plant in corn or plant in winter squash or whomsoever. And that would be neat to see if that happened in amongst canna patches too.
Mm. Now, we had a couple of other plants to potentially talk about, but I think we spent so long talking about Canna and persimmon that we should probably move on.
Hmm.
And I want to spend some time talking about your mindset and experiences with reducing dependence on inputs in management systems. And you mentioned you had a period in your life you were doing guerrilla gardening. And did that give you any insights or experiences about like what you can get away with in cutting corners?
Well, that one was very, very early on, and it. I wouldn't say I had anything like, oh, I was came up with this great solution. It was basically getting like potatoes that were sprouted from a local bodega and digging up mint from a friend's garden and planting that by a creek, and that kind of thing. It wasn't like, oh, I created this whole oasis in the city parks. I liked
Mm,
the idea of adding food to that landscape. And I left there before I could have really extracted much deep information long term or like multiple years and that kind of thing. It planted the seed for me of like, oh, you can just plant in a wild way. It doesn't have to be this formal thing. It doesn't have to be in straight lines. You don't have to have a strong plan. Just get plants going and see what
mm,
happens, kind of thing. Um, as far as the input reduction, it it hasn't been this extremely strong driver for me to like, can we get to absolutely zero inputs for our system? Because where we live, there's just so many different waste. Uh, like we work with chickens in our system, and there's food scraps to be had, which is definitively an input. It's definitely a fertility input,
mm,
um, and that's really useful in helping to support their needs and give them exercise and also create compost, which is useful for us. And in order for the food scraps to really be functional, we need a whole lot of carbon. And wood chips are something that we can get for free pretty readily,
mm,
or we trade with arborists. Like we have friends who do arborist work, and they can offer wood chips in exchange for plants because they want to plant food forests. Um, we found people that have like giant round bales of unsprayed hay that they're trying to get rid of. Not like, oh, let me buy them brand new, but like get them off the farm and you can get them for like $20 a piece. So leveraging the waste stream of bulk material when it's available feels like that's a reasonable thing to do. And then also one of the sites we farm is 6 acres and it's I'm only there 1 or 2 days a week. And that site does not get any external inputs at all anymore because it just I have an electric riding mower that has a bagger system, and just doing the maintenance of access paths and like cleaning up leaves in the fall or managing like the planted a few thousand trees there and I have to keep cutting them to make sure there's light for other ones. The nutrient cycling is done and like I can establish trees and mulch and feed them from there.
mm,
It's not that easy to bring mulch to that site or compost that site. So then it's just easier to not have that be a zero input system. So that's what I'm doing.
mm,
But then for the nursery, where there's so much production happening, um, I would not be like, I'm going to spend $1,000 on inputs this year. But like, if somebody's like, hey, do you want this huge pile of steaming wood chips or do you want this giant pile of brassica leaves? And be like, yep, cool, great, let's throw it in.
bring it in. Yeah.
Um, yeah. But cover cropping feels more important over time and managing nutrient cycling, the management of access, that's the highest value leverage I can think of is like thoughtful, accurate mowing because we don't own any of the land that we farm on. It's like for the sake of the relation of the people who own the land who like it to feel clean and organized and thoughtful, a mowing regime is appropriate to that end.
Mm,
We have ticks, and so like having it be somewhat well mowed is actually good for like safety and health. And then if all that's going into our fertility program, then like that works really well. And it's not because like ethically I can't bring anything in. It's just like, no, that's the best use of that material. So I'll put in the extra effort because it's a lot more to mow and like empty the bags every 2 minutes for the whole session, but it's so worth it. So
yeah.
I do
Yeah.
that.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. You also mentioned before, particularly with the canna, you suspected it was drawing moisture from the air and putting it into the ground. And I think
Mhm.
I've seen similar things as well, like the very simple model of how plant hydrology works, that they're just these sponges and tubes, and it's a one-way kind of trip to evaporation. Do you want to talk a bit more about that? Because I don't know. I wonder if we're seeing similar things.
Yeah, I mean, it's just early observations, but this summer, let's see. So in May and June, our summer was very much like the average growing season in Hawaii, where we got like rain pretty much every single day. It was like 2 or 3 inches of rain a week. Um, and that was for 6 weeks. It was just like the farmers around here were absolutely miserable because like the machines wouldn't get into the fields and all that. And then like a light switch, it went from that to basically like a Mediterranean climate. Like got almost no rain and just very strong, like full sun, cloudless days for 2 months straight kind of thing. And we have that very regularly now where it's like within the season you have multiple seasons. That is not what people historically experience here. And the canna was one plant that didn't feel as though it ever started to go into like a biological pause with the dryness and
Mm,
trying to understand what was happening there. And I would go out in the mornings and observe because they were growing so fast that they were like consuming and pushing away the mulch that I put around them. And like the worms were so active around them that they were consuming the mulch. And so I put the mulch in other areas because they're growing so well. So there was actually a little bit of bare soil around some of them. And almost every morning it would be a decent amount of moisture, like darker soil right at their base. And if I dug in with my fingers, it was deeper down.
mm,
And so I just landed on the thing like, oh, they're at night, because the relative humidity, even when we're in bone dry time, like the relative humidity goes up and the nights are cool no matter what throughout the summer. And so it's a good condition for for dew to form. It just burns off right away in the morning, but that felt like a plant that absolutely farmed evening dew and drew it down into the roots. And with enough mulch and a ground cover amongst them, I could imagine canna being like dotted throughout a field as like part of like a drought preventer or a facilitator of water harvesting during drought moments.
Mm,
So I do want to try it because the other field we farm at is like exposed, full sun, wind, and like it needs those crop. Like they grew much smaller in that field, but I think if there are more of them and they were like perpendicular to the wind loading, that they could actually like draw more moisture out and like get it into the crop land there.
mm. Yeah,
We'll see.
I see similar things. Like recently, I'd noted that I had a whole bunch of canna tubers that I was like getting rid of, and I just threw them all in a big pile, big dry pile, assuming that they would just, eventually shrivel and die. And they kept growing. Like they had no root system. There's, I don't know, there's so many inexplicable things that happen if you're paying attention.
Hmm.
And other specific plants in very slightly different soils or climates or microclimates even often experience dramatically different levels of drought tolerance. Like they in the just the right location, some plants seem to be able to find water in a way that defies any explanation.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, we have tr like that's why trees are such a backbone part of our system is that they persist year after year and like with a really crushingly dry summer one year and then overly wet in the next, our winters tend to be pretty moist overall. The trees are able to like they take like a 3 year rolling average, it feels like, of what's going on with precipitation. Whereas like a transplant of a cabbage, you've got 70 days for that to become the thing you want, and the conditions need to be right for that time in order for it to
Mm,
work out. But like, chestnut tree, you're looking at like a few hundred years. And so what's a couple dry years and a couple wet years in the scheme of things? So it's interesting. That's normally an attribute to trees that it feels like pretty much no matter what, they tend to grow at a similar pace every single year. And when I see that in herbaceous plants like sunchokes demonstrate competence despite the amount of rainfall, they tend to seem to just grow like they're doing it. They got their own agenda on like how they're making that happen. Um, but it's the plants that are very reactive, like Fuki. It's a giant sweet butter burr. That's a distant cousin to our native coltsfoot. And that's a leaf that if we get dry and hot and there's sun exposure, they zero out. Like they
mm,
just disappear for the rest, they give up for the rest of the season. And it's like that's a plant that's fragile. And like I still love them. I want to have them, but they need to be in way wetter, shadier contexts for the future we're coming towards.
mm,
Um, and kind of like it's super early in the experience with it, but it was shocking to, it was very pleasantly surprising to me, like the level of competence and even keel attitude it felt like it carried with itself. Just like,
mm,
okay, today's the day, I'm gonna do the best I can, and it's just gonna work. And there was very little that seemed to be occurring with all the variations that were like perturbing or disappointing for it.
mm,
I
mm.
like I like those characters.
I wanted to ask a bit as well about any advice or experience from managing a nursery. So, like you said, that's a more like you're not aiming to reduce inputs in that, but I don't know. I'm just curious about how you manage resource flows and time and space in what can be a very dynamic and chaotic and potentially dangerous environment too. In the, I mean, I know from my own experience, like you can turn your back on a greenhouse for a few months if life gets in the way and it turns into like the most spectacular mess.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a few high tunnels, but it's not anything like what you'd imagine of like giant high tunnels. And the biggest one we have is 14 feet by 50, which for me is really big and amazing, but it's not actually like a commercial sized high tunnel.
Mm,
And that space is a very intense mix of, so there's banana and fig and pomegranate and rosemary, and there's a ton of perennial elements within there, and then also annuals throughout. And because there's so much diversity, it tends to be pretty nicely yieldy throughout the season. We also prioritize an immense amount of organic matter in the creation of the beds of that space, and mulch thoroughly all the time. So it's pretty stable in that way. Anyway, I don't know. I think just with practice over the years, the system, a system that feels compatible with who I am as a person and management styles, but also like my ethical holding has evolved and made sense that like the integration of our extremely high value, financially needed nursery crops and our day-to-day subsistence crops for eating all make sense to be merged with each other, and that there's a structural design within that that makes sense where like every given permanent raised bed makes sense to have nursery crop and woody plant growth either from seed or cuttings be in the interior. Like the middle third of each bed tends to be our financial nursery crop, and then the two thirds, the edges that are easier to access on a more regular basis are our annual crops, and they all get the same level of attention and management. Like I'll weed as thoroughly in a bed of carrots that's meant to just be for us to eat as I would in a bed of Siberian peaches, which might be like $1,000 worth of income if it comes to fruition. And so if everybody gets the same level of attention and care, then somehow it works. I'm not sure how to explain it. It's not this
Mm.
like stratifying thing of like whatever, there's that. Who cares if the kohlrabi works out? It's like kohlrabi is so critical for our winter life. And then also American plums are amazing. So let's grow them together. Um, and that integration tends to somehow make it where like all the plants get the enough attention for them to come to fruition, but they don't need to go any further than that. They don't need to be the biggest ones there are because we offer plants at like lower than conventional nursery prices. And so I'm not trying to like blow the competition out of the water. Like we just want plants that are really healthy, really alive, and really affordable. And then we need to eat in order to do that. So that's what everything is. And somehow like the whole design and layout, it just flows from that ethos, I guess.
I'm also really curious to ask about how you manage customer demand for, I know from personal experience, the the plant collecting community goes through kind of fads and fashions, like there's
Mhm.
some new exciting new thing that everyone wants, and then the nurseries have to pedal like mad to try and, create more of it because people keep asking for it. But then 5 minutes later, it's like, oh, either everyone's already got it or they found out it's not as great as the advertising said.
Mhm.
And or that just the next shiny thing has come along to be excited about. And I'm just wondering how you manage that kind of shifting culture.
Um, we try, well, it enters it overlaps with my own desire anyway to try to bring on new plant beings each year and try to like the canna is brand new and something somebody to work with and like understanding cold hardy pomegranates and what are their needs and like certain varietals of plum to grow from seed is kind of new, and getting that going is compelling. Um, so I want to do that anyway, and I want to have those plant beings in our landscape for the relationship that we want to have with them, with my family, and with our subsistence and like nourishment. And that tends to beget an offering that's moving enough to keep us compelling for people to keep coming back.
Hmm.
Like, we sell in the spring, we sell in the fall, and it's not a guarantee, but pretty much every season there's going to be a few things that are brand new. And people that have ordered from us, it's amazing. It's very sweet. Like, there's some people that have ordered like 16 times from us over the last 8 years and um, or more. And there's a reason for them to come back because there's something novel. And then we also offer, like, you can search online for cuttings of um, dormant black currant cultivars to grow for yourself. And edible acres will be just about the lowest cost for those of every option in the United States. And like we are that for like we're the low, just about the lowest cost conventional or organic for seed garlic.
Mm.
And so people just searching for these things find this nursery where it's like that seems weird that it's that low of a price, and then they read about what we're up to and like, yeah, we do stuff by hand and we use rainwater, and like, oh, it's actually like they seem like they're doing nice work, and we just keep our cost of living really low. We don't ask a lot from life around. Like we try to raise our own food, we try to barter with people, and so we can afford to offer these things. And then I think that creates buoyancy and continual committed interest in who we are as a nursery. That like it's really inexpensive. The plants are actually pretty good. They're unique and it's constantly shifting. And we really enjoy it anyway. So it's not like this deep hit of like, oh, we're scrounging to make it work. We just live really lean so that it works.
Mm. Mm.
Um, and we do a fair volume. Like we've done 6,000 orders over the years of shipping these like pretty sizable food forest starts to people. And with that amount of movement of plant material, like it works financially at the end of the day.
Well, that's a perfect place to ask you your perspective on the community impact of nurseries like yours, like that catalytic ability to uh, concentrate and generate and then distribute material that is actually changing the way people, live their lives and source their food. Uh, what kind of feedback do you get along those lines?
That it's meaningful and it's really worth us continuing to do. Like I'll hit walls sometimes where I'm just like, I don't know if I want to keep it's a lot. Like there are times where it's like on the threshold of possible amount, like physically and temporally and mentally to like do the stuff at certain seasons. Like for 3 weeks straight, it's just as much as I can possibly do every day. And getting feedback from people that it's meaningful, like they are starting to process the fruits that are coming off of these plants and sharing them with their family, or that they've developed their own small scale nursery where they are, and it seems like it's working. Um, like that adds up to what feels like, yes, this is a pathway that makes a lot of sense. And then I think each shipping season there's a moment within it after like 100 orders or so where I just pause and we just talk about like, this is crazy. Like we're packing these boxes with like it took a long time to accrue all the genetics in our landscape, but these are all plants that are innately so like remarkably obscenely generative in how much seed and plant material they put out, that they're just like a fountain in our landscape. And the thought of like how much abundance and health and resilience it means, like these are plants that have been tested that they don't get fertilizer, we don't irrigate anything. Most of the plants we don't weed that much, we just like whatever they do. And the feeling of that landing in all these different places, like every state in the US will ship to, and then that those plants are getting stewarded by folks that like even with pretty good benign neglect, they have a good chance, and then they really escape in wonderful ways. Like hazelnuts, the squirrels start taking them and moving them. Like I see hazelnuts coming up in our neighbor's lawn, they're coming up by the road line. Um, so it feels pretty mean, and it feels like a very strong political act too of like supporting people in enabling themselves to like help atrophy the system that predates upon us.
Mm.
That like if the more we can generate our own fuel and medicine and food and relationship like within walking distance of where we are, the less that whole giant gross machine can feed on us. And that feels strong, and without any direct like without any violence and with yeah, without like it's a way to really resist a a reality that feels pretty gross around like how the big extractive machines are that are around us. They, without our direct attention, without our dependency on them, they kind of would shrivel up, I think, a
Mm.
bit. And so it's a way to say no to something like I really don't feel good about what's happening in our country and globally and the way things are managed. And like I'm not going to protest in the street and fight about it, but I can like help people, help ourselves and help other people kind of like just quietly disappear.
Mm.
Like just keep taking steps, like smiling and waving and just like like pulling away from it all, like going online less, buying less, and needing less, and then just having more right where they are
Yeah.
feels like the strongest way we can navigate this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I love that attitude. I wanted to ask as well if you have any thoughts about succession. Like often, particularly tree crops are ideally a multi-generational kind of asset for the community and the family. Have you
Hmm.
thought about that in the long term?
Not in a serious way. I'm 45. I hope to be around for a while.
Mm,
Our daughter Zelda is 2 and is like we maybe we'll have, I don't know, I think that might be it. We're not sure, but she is extremely interested in a really sweet way in pretty much every tree crop that she interacts with. Like she knows persimmons. She's known them for a full year. She eats gummies. Autumn olive is one of her favorite fruits, and she's always asking for hesh nuts, which are like ch roasted chestnuts. And she'll ask for black walnuts, and we crack those, and hickory. So I feel like she's being nourished and sustained by the tree crops that are in our landscape already. And so I just trust it'll unfold how it's supposed to with her, and that I'm not going to get stuck on this idea of like, oh, the trees have to be maintained this way or that way. Like I just wherever we can steward land and set in motion tree systems that don't need much human interaction in order to persist, the
mm.
better. And um, it can be that someday we're not here and there's nobody's managing, quote unquote, except like all the wild beings are managing. Um, but that there's just these tree systems that just like dump food for whomsoever, like all the wild beings, the humans and otherwise that want stuff, and that would be good enough. Like I don't need it to be anything bigger than that.
You can also look at the impact of the nursery to be the legacy rather than one particular property with a certain set of trees. Like spread it far and
Exactly.
wide, and then it isn't
Yep.
vulnerable to one lightning strike taking it out.
Yeah, there are an immense number of photocopies. Like there are people that have ordered over time, like truly every single plant we offer and seem to be really stewarding them in really thoughtful ways. And like to me, that's the most resilient thing. And it takes the ego out and it takes the possessive idea out. Like I have no interest in possessing like, oh, this named variety from our nursery. I don't want it everywhere. Like I want anything we do that feels like it's slightly better than what it was before. I'd love to see it photocopied, and then I don't even care if anyone remembers where it came from at all. Like that's who cares? It's just plants are neat, and everyone deserves, all the living beings deserve access to like clean air and healthy food and water, and those plants all help do that. So that's all that matters. And yeah, that's the most resilient bit is like all these plants copied everywhere. And the YouTube channel, I try to endeavor to like share lots of notes on how we propagate in ways that are accessible. So then it's like there's the plant material, but also here's like an interesting human scale toolkit to make sure you feel like you can ramp up anything you want where you are, and you don't need me beyond like a little hint and some cuttings. Like that's it.
Mm. Now, this might be a tell me if this is too big of a question, but you mentioned that you have Amish in your community, and I'm really fascinated by that culture. And I wonder if you could like do a compare and contrast with how permaculture tried to build culture from its early roots and how its successes and problems versus how the Amish have been doing something comparable for what's it, over a century now? They've been around, nearly two.
Yeah, I don't know enough about either of like yeah, I don't think I have enough to have any really meaningful contribution to that question. Um, I think the permaculture, there's just it's a fraught term. It's a little loaded and it's complex, and it's sometimes a little bit quite like sometimes I wonder if it's something I want to like, oh, should I do it? Because there are some personalities within it that are pretty intense, and there's a lot of like really to me like wildly broad concessions that folks make where it's like, yeah, this is a permaculture farm, but we have to use plastic mulch because or like, yeah, we have this diesel generator running this thing, or like we have this big machine because do. And it's like,
Mm,
wait, you know, like I liked Bill Mollison's work and David Holmgren's, like the principles felt really legitimate to me. And like I feel like we kind of stay bound to them. And I like calling what we do permaculture, but I don't know if I'm part of the however that name is being used. Um, and the Amish feel like really, really special in some very key ways, and then also feel very fraught and complex to me. And I don't know the quality of life for the women, the mothers in those homes, and it feels as though some of the children uh, maybe there's a lot less room for play and exploration than might be ideal. Not to say like, oh, modern American culture, like the kids are having a great time, but I don't think either of them that there's lots of sweetness and great aspects that feel compelling and wonderful, and then there's lots of stuff just like anything where it's like, oh, I wonder if that's as healthy and real and balanced and sustainable and nice as it could be, or if there's some aspects within there that feel like really challenging. Um, but but I love that one thing I really appreciate about the Amish community and the nursery and the store we work with is the nursery manager is like so profoundly interested in all these different tree crops. He's like, "Oh, persimmon, what's that?" Like, well, pawpaw, what is it? And he hands it to the kids, and like they really, there's a child like there's a really sweet innocence in like exploring all these different things and seeing if it's a fit, and that he's open to trying to like propagate these plants from seed, or we trade cuttings of different varieties of white currant and the goji berry. They tried goji berry and they liked that, and so they started propagating those, and we get leftover annual starts from them. And that relationship of not having like an adversarial thing, but just like mutualism with that community feels super sweet to me. And I look forward to seeing how I keep trying to talk them into like what about getting more windbreaks and more shelter belts and food forests? And there's a really strong feeling of utility that needs to be first and foremost. And
mm.
with the other stuff might be a little too frilly. Um, but I I want to keep bringing them out to our landscapes and like sharing what that feels like and what the fruits feel like. And I they do feel like a community that might take on a new idea like that if there's no electricity and fuel wrapped around it, they'll try it out. And it isn't. So
Yeah,
maybe they
yeah.
will.
That reminds me, like, why I renamed the podcast for Combination Nation. It's about that power of crossing over and hybridization, that two
Mhm.
traditions or two species can collide and come into all sorts of different possible mutually beneficial combinations and just play around with it. And to talk to somebody who's coming from a permaculture background who is having a positive influence on the Amish, I think is. And it feels like a little historic moment that we've like got the camera out and taken a snapshot of it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's not a big deal. It's just folks working on stuff, like people that are doing labor and trying to have food and eke out a living in certain realms and like supporting each other. I see their nursery, it's a small scale thing, but there's for the local community, they do a huge amount of business. Like tons of
Mm,
people go there because they're like the least expensive spot in like the whole area. And if they had if people landed there and like, yeah, they could get begonias and whatnot, but they could get like really nice cultivar elderberries and like a whole bunch of different varieties of currants that are useful. And maybe at some point, honeyberries and sea berries could be something that they offer. I bet it would work for them financially. And then I don't feel competitive with them because we sell online and we sell bare root. And it's a different season. And even if it was in competition, it'd be like, cool, that's neat to let's just match each other's prices and just send people back and forth. That'd be great.
mm. Um, Now, I've probably kept you as long as I should, so let's wrap up.
Mhm.
The final question that I ask everybody is if you could wave a magic wand and like create a new life form. So probably a plant with you, but maybe you'll surprise me and it'll be an animal or something different. But yeah, what would you wish into the world, or do you think would be really useful for people to have to work with?
I don't know. There's too many neat things. I don't know that I could think of something that's missing. It's like there's just a million, there's so many different beings that all exist that I just haven't met yet. I just maybe wish a chance to like meet all of them or like
Mm.
hang out with them. I don't think there's anything that's missing from the natural, like the natural world just has so many wild, cool iterations of all everything that I can't think of anybody that's like, oh man, if only this bat also had legs that it could run on. You know, I can't think of anything.
I
Nature's pretty loaded. What do
I
you
could
got?
I can I wrote a whole damn book about it, so don't get me started. Oh, well, I mean, the one thing that every chance I get, I float this idea just in case the right person is listening, and one day hopefully it'll be true. My most ambitious thing that I wish for is the domestication of elephants, because
Hmm,
there's two broad lineages of them left in Africa and Asia. There used to be dozens of them, and they are on the down. And I look at like the wild ancestors of cattle, they're all gone. So if they hadn't have been domesticated, that element in the ecosystem would have been lost. And
hmm,
particularly in forest ecosystems, those large animals, I think, are vital for managing trees and vegetation on a scale that humans can do it if we've got chainsaws and tractors and maybe a
right.
whole bunch of cattle with equipment to make them all work together. But if you could have elephants that wanted to live among humans and that we understood each
Yeah.
other, not necessarily that they're in a cage or we're chaining them up, just that they've transformed in a way that makes them thrive in the presence of humans. That's the ultimate goal, and
Hmm.
that we can do forest agriculture together in a way that we currently can't.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Yeah. Like intense big animal disturbance is a pretty rad. Being able to push trees over is kind of useful. And like
Mm.
having beings that do the work and derive joy and pleasure from it and their livelihood from it. Like our
Yeah.
chickens just love making compost. Like they love
Hmm.
shredding it apart and aerating it and getting it into a fine, like getting all the seed load out. It's like I could do all that stuff manually in all these different ways, but like they do the work, for that system.
Mm.
I did think of something if there could be a line of coffee that we could grow where we are, I
Hmm.
wouldn't be mad about it. Because that's one thing that's like, I don't know, like chocolate we could do without, but coffee is something we really enjoy on a daily basis. And like if we could, maybe in a high tunnel or like a nice zone 6A hardy coffee, that would be a new, a new novel being that is not floating out there in the universe that I know of yet.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant, brilliant. There you go. I did manage to get an answer out of you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Sean, thank you very much for what's been a fascinating conversation. Where can people learn more about what you're doing, and maybe even if they're in the right part of the world, get some plants from you?
Sure. Thank you, Shane. Yeah, this is really fun and great questions, great conversation. I'm looking forward to connecting with you more outside of this as well, and just like sharing ideas and picking your brain about these realms that I'm just dipping a toe in.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, if people are interested, if you search online, Edible Acres, you find us pretty easily. We have an Edible Acres YouTube channel that if what I talked about sounds compelling or interesting is maybe worth checking out or subscribing to. And our website's edibleacres.org, and we offer shipping. We offer people can order stuff on March 1st and September 1st. All the information's on the website. And if people are really close to where we are, they can just reach out and say, "Hey, I want to come by and like chat, and I'm happy to barter hunted venison or lake trout or like these interesting wild sour berries in exchange for some cuttings and plants." Like that's my favorite thing when we can meet new folks that trade, crystallized honey or really thick maple syrup for like current cuttings and chestnut trees. That's the fun stuff. That's the community for me.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, Shane, this was lovely. Thank you.
To support the show, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or a comment on YouTube. Next week, I'll be talking to the sometimes incandescent and sometimes incendiary James Howard Kunstler.